Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu Mavid Vishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman protect us. May he guide us and give us strength and right understanding. May love and harmony be with us all. Om peace, peace, peace. And good evening. We are reading from the teachings of Swami Ramakrishna, the Apostle to the South, as he was often called. And this evening we're going to start with his section marked chapter 11 in volume 1 of his complete works, and it's called The Teachings of Sri Ramakrishna. We're going to skip some of the preliminaries that just tell you that it was published in Prabhupada Bharata and so forth, and skip to the substance of the talks. So Atma will begin reading with what's on page 107 in this particular volume, where it starts, today all educated people. All right.
Today all educated people know Sri Ramakrishna's name and his glory. Endowed with a mind absolutely unattached to lust and greed, this great man's edifying teachings will greatly benefit everyone. With this faith, we have resolved to thoroughly publish his teachings, which are full of anecdotes conveying much wisdom, beauty, and simplicity. May our resolution be fruitful. This is our prayer.
So it's nice. We're going to get a glimpse into a slightly different viewpoint of Ramakrishna's teachings than we might get from the Gospel, which of course was all recorded by M. So anything that happened when M was not there isn't necessarily, it's not going to be in there. And so we have to depend on anecdotes like this from other direct disciples as to what Ramakrishna might have said. All right, so we're going to continue.
Just as by day the sky appears starless to men due to the overwhelming brilliant light of the sun, in the same way, not being able to perceive the all-pervading reality in this world, blinded by the power of ignorance, worldly men say the world is godless. During the day in the sky, due to the influence of sunlight, not a single star is visible. But to conclude that there are no stars in the sky is not a right decision. The same way, due to the influence of Maya, one does not see God in this movable and immovable world, and hence there is no God. Such a conclusion is also a delusion.
You know, it's interesting. We used to have John Dobson here on an annual basis, and he would help us make telescopes. And I remember one time when it might have been either Venus or Jupiter, we would start tracking it early in the morning, just before sunrise, when you could see it. And so we'd get the telescope on it. And then if you were diligent, you could keep the telescope on it even during the day. And the telescope would magnify it enough so that you could actually see Venus in the telescope, even in broad daylight. You look up in the sky, of course, you can't see anything. But you can, with the telescope, it magnifies it enough that you can actually start to see it. But it certainly is true that you can't see these things with the naked eye. Occasionally you could see it if you knew where to look, you could tell that there was something there. But so in spiritual life, we're trying to increase and magnify our view of the divine. And so even in the glare of of ignorance, you could say. It's kind of interesting. We don't usually use light as a metaphor for ignorance. Here we're using light as a metaphor for ignorance. But even in the glare of daylight, we can see the divine. Okay, let's see what else Sri Ramakrishna has to say.
Can the abundance of salt and seawater be known by anybody without tasting it a little? Similarly, can anyone experience the presence of the all-pervading power of God in this world without purifying the mind by earnest spiritual practices? The seawater is full of salt. One does not come to know this by looking at the sea. One has to taste the seawater. In the same way, this world is full of God's power. But one cannot understand by looking at the world. One has to make special effort and do spiritual practices.
Yeah, indeed, God pervades everything, but we don't normally see it that way. People that have had spiritual experiences will be able to keep that realization, even though they will not be in nirvikalpa samadhi after their spiritual experience or any kind of samadhi. They still retain that memory, and they still see the world differently. This is what one might call the vijnani state, where you actually perceive the divine in everything, and you can still function in the world, but your knowledge of the world is just different, and you don't see it the same way again. And even mystics in other traditions have the same kind of experience, whether it's a Sufi tradition or a Christian mystic or Native American. They see things in the world that remind them that the divine spirit is permeating all things. And so it's this, through our special effort in spiritual practices, that we are able to develop this type of spiritual vision that lasts even after a spiritual experience. All right, number 3.
Just as a vulture soaring high in the sky has all its attention focused on the rotten corpses below, so the mind of worldly-minded pundits always seeks delight in the vain and vulgar pleasures of this world, like money, name, and fame. Vulture flies high in the sky, but its eyes are fixed on the rotten and decaying dead bodies only. In the same way, one finds, although there are many pundits who are well-read in scriptures and highest Vedanta, yet they're busy with insignificant things such as fame, name, and money.
Yes, and of course we get that same phenomenon even in the Western traditions. You get some preachers that end up being very materialistic and simply wanting to get more and more donations so they can build bigger and bigger mega churches. And then you also get Christian pastors that are very spiritual and very introspective. So this is not something that's unique to pundits in India. This is something that you get in all sorts of traditions, or it might be power, it might be some spiritual leader of a country that ends up also being so lustful for power that they're really not steeped very deeply in the spiritual aspects of their tradition. All right, he has long passages in Sanskrit, which we're obviously skipping here, skipping over to the translated sections. And this is a long paragraph, so we'll see if I need to interrupt in the middle or not. All right.
Once some fisherwomen, carrying a basket full of fish, went to sell fish to a faraway village market. The whole day went off in selling and purchasing. With empty baskets on their heads, they headed towards their houses. After walking through some fields, they reached near a village. Just then the sky became overcast with clouds. Strong winds began to blow, and clouds began to thunder. Lightning began to strike. Like sharp arrows, rain began to hit, and dense darkness of night began to fall. Searching for a shelter with anxiety, the eyes of fisherwomen, by God's grace, fell on the house of a flower seller. They rushed to the flower seller's house. Fortunately, the flower seller was a devotee of God and was kind. And seeing those fisherwomen in trouble, he took them to a portion of a house in his garden and asked them to spend the night there. After the first part of the night, the rain and wind almost stopped. Thunder almost stopped. And like pieces of crystal, stars began to shine in the sky. Pleasant wind began to blow gently, and putting all people in the lap of sleep, the sweetness-filled night had incarnated on the earth. Gentle wind, fragrant with the fragrance of flowers, tenderly rocked the member of flower seller's family to sleep. But due to the smell not experienced before touching their nostrils, and by not getting the smell of rotten fish, which they used to get in their houses, the fisherwomen were not getting sleep. They were changing sides on their beds. And the last one of them said, "Oh, sisters, by giving shelter in a flower seller's house, the cruel Creator has put us in trouble. Not able to close my eyes even for a second." Hearing her words, her companion said, "Oh, what misery God has put on us by putting us in such a dirty place." And like this, not able to sleep, the one fisherwoman who was most intelligent of them all came out with a solution and said, "Sisters, I have a solution. By following it, all of us can sleep peacefully." And hearing her words, other women companions asked with great eagerness, "Oh, tell us what that solution is." And she replied, "Now, all of you, wet your fish baskets with water. Then keep them under your head. The smell of a rotten fish will surely bring good sleep." And listening to her suggestion, by pondering over the truth of her statement, all followed her suggestion by getting the stench of fish, which removed the fragrance of flower. They soon fell into deep sleep and began to snore.
Might as well finish this little paragraph.
By the help of this story, Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna Deva have shown the primacy of one's nature and temperament, both of repeated actions and thoughts. Due to his long habit of bad company, a wicked person cannot bear the company of a holy man. His inclination towards bad company only attracts and charms him. The one who is attached to lust and greed cannot give up his attachment and make his mind absorbed in the pure Satchidananda, who is the embodiment of ever-existence, Para-Brahman. Therefore, whatever men and women practice all their lives becomes their confirmed nature. They always follow this inherent nature of theirs. They even give up good things due to their bad habits. It is therefore advisable for intelligent men and women to practice spiritual disciplines with earnestness and be sharers of pure, divine bliss.
Yes, if people that are used to big city life and going to clubs and entertainment and so forth every weekend, if they move to a nice, quiet, rural town, they wonder, what on earth do people do here for entertainment? And they get all frustrated because there's nothing to do. But of course, if you're used to either a meditative life or a scholarly life. You just go home and you meditate, or you read holy books, or you do something else of that nature, and you're perfectly happy. And you can do that whether you're living in a big city or whether you're living in a small town or a rural community. So, but people that are used to all of that hubbub of busy city life and partake of it, they feel very out of place when they're confronted with peace and quiet. And you notice how people go out, they go on vacation, and they go out to a national park, and you find them with a boombox playing loud music. And you'd think they went out to nature to be nice and peaceful and quiet, but they have to take their noise with them. It's very peculiar that people can't seem to realize what they went there for. They went there to escape from their usual busy routine, and yet they end up taking a lot of it with them. All right, let's continue with the next sections. These are, as that one was a very long one, these are all quite short. But of course, that was quite a colorful rendition of a familiar parable that Sri Ramakrishna used to tell. All right.
As a miser has a very strong yearning for gold, even so be the yearning for the service of God.
And of course, that's a familiar metaphor again. The idea if a miser or a robber is in one room and knows that there's gold in the next room, how much effort they go to break into that next room. And that's the kind of yearning that we need to feel for God. And that indeed, God is closer to us than gold being in the next room. He is the nearest of the near. And yet, we have to cultivate that yearning for something that is part of our own nature. It's that close, okay?
As when the fruit grows from the flower, the petals thereof disappear of themselves, so when true knowledge comes, vanity goes off.
Yeah, I'm sure you've all, well, perhaps you haven't. If you haven't had a garden, you may not have noticed these kind of things. But when the flowers bloom, of course, then if they get pollinated, they form fruits or pods, and then the pods begin to form, and then the old flowers fall off of themselves. And so this is the idea that Sri Ramakrishna is referring to. And of course, he was living in a temple garden, and he could observe all of these things very carefully. But this is what needs to happen. The fruit is the fruit of our spiritual practice, you could say. And so the flower is as blooming in the garden of the world, and we get pollinated with the love of God. We get a initiation from a spiritual teacher who initiates us with a mantra, and that mantra then starts to take fruit, and the fruit gradually develops. Some fruits develop very quickly. Some fruits take a whole season to develop and ripen. And so similarly, we are cultivating the development of that fruit of ourselves. And when it's ripe, the old dried up blossom will fall off of its own. All right.
So long as the clouds of desire cover the broad expanse of our heart, how can there be any possibility of the sunshine of true knowledge?
Read the next one. Go ahead.
So long as the bee is outside the flower, it emits a buzzing sound, but no sooner it is inside the flower, then it becomes at once silent.
Yeah, so again, many of these are referring to this desire for God that becomes covered. God is our innermost nature, and yet we don't see it. And so he's referring to clouds of desire covering the broad expanse of our heart. So the desire for knowledge is really there, but it's covered, and it ends up being diverted into other areas where we think we're going to get what we crave. But what we're really craving is illumination and inner knowledge. And as he goes on with the bee buzzes around looking for nectar, and when he finds a good flower, then he goes inside and he's busy collecting the nectar, and he doesn't buzz anymore. And so similarly, when the spirit has landed on the nectar of divine knowledge, it no longer is busy looking for it somewhere outside. We find it inside. If you've ever worked with flowers, you know that I pollinate flowers, and I have to be careful. I have to look, because there's sometimes a bee hidden way down inside. If I'm not careful, I'll get stung, and I don't want to bother the poor little bee in his business. So I have to wait sometimes and say, it's okay, you can finish your business. And then I'll do the pollinating. All right.
The learned man wants to show his pedantry by big, high-sounding arguments on scriptural texts, as long as he does not realize the Almighty, the end and aim of all Shastras.
Yes, when you read certain books, you find that to be true. You find certain
Horrible translation.
spiritual teachers that like to write books. You find that sometimes it seems like the way they write makes it sound more complicated rather than clearer. So that there are plenty of good books by enlightened people that make things clearer. So if you find one that seems to be just extremely wordy, it's probably one you can skip. Okay.
When, through the Lord's grace, the aspirant at last sees the sun shining in all its glory, so when Maya goes away, the Lord is revealed everywhere.
Yeah, that really reiterates what we said earlier, is that when you find the God within, then you also see God everywhere. It's an interesting phenomenon that when you reach that enlightened state, which is the realization of that Atman is Brahman, then you realize that everything is permeated with Brahman, and the illusion goes away. You know, it's a little bit like being a magician that's watching another magician doing a magic show. You're still entertained by what's going on, but you know exactly what the magician's doing. And so similarly, the enlightened person knows exactly what's going on in this world of Maya. It's not that it says that Maya goes away. Well, it goes away to a certain extent. It goes away, the ignorant part of the Maya goes away. But you still see the world the way it is, but you know exactly how the trick is done. And you know that it's Brahman that is appearing in all these diverse forms. All right.
When through his grace, I read that, when he attains true devotion through his grace, then being satisfied by this vision, he becomes quiet.
That's referring to the bee again, all right?
When the mind becomes covered and soiled with ignorance, it does not reflect God. Does a mirror covered over with dirt ever reflect any image?
Not very well. Of course, if it's only a little dirty, it reflects it a little bit. And that's kind of the process we go through. You know, at first, you may not see any reflection at all, but as you do a little cleaning or a little polishing, the image begins to get a little bit clearer. Or for example, if you if you've had a swimming pool or access to a swimming pool, and something is at the bottom of the swimming pool, if everyone's been jumping around in the swimming pool and there are lots of waves on the swimming pool, the image of it is extremely distorted. And you can see that there's something there, but you haven't the foggiest idea what it is. But if you ask people to stop jumping in and out of the swimming pool and doing laps, and the waves on the water gradually calm down, you can begin to make out what it is. And when it becomes completely still, then you can see clearly what is at the bottom of the pool. So similarly, when the waves of the mind are stilled, at first they're not completely stilled, but you get glimpses. You get glimpses of what's there, of the divinity that's there. And as you get glimpses of it, it's easier and easier to focus on it. And so as it gets easier and easier to focus on it, then the image gets clearer and clearer as the mind gets more and more still. All right.
The clouds cover the sun and the sky, so Maya hides and conceals the Lord. As when the clouds disperse, the sun shines in all its glory, so when Maya goes away, the Lord is revealed everywhere.
Yeah, it reminds me of times when we would take the telescopes out and there'd be patchy cloudiness, and you'd go out and you'd focus on something, and then it would start to get kind of blurry, and then it would go away, and the patchiness of the clouds would start to go back over the object that you're trying to look at, whether it be the moon or Venus or Jupiter or a star cluster or something. And so then as the clouds go back over it, then if it's a very thin, kind of a foggy layer, you can still kind of see it, but it's kind of blurry. And then if the cloud goes over it completely, you can't see it at all. So similarly, during the day, of course, you can still experience that with the sun or the moon. And the sun might be partly obscured or completely obscured by a cloud or a high fog, which we, of course, experience a lot during May gray and June gloom here in Southern California. All right.
As in the troubled surface of the sea, the broken images of the moon are reflected and made, as it were, to dance. So in the unsettled, though pure mind of a worldly man, the partial images of God appears at times.
Yeah, again, the similar image of, but this time it's a reflection on the surface rather than trying to see something underneath. Okay.
As the darkness of 1,000 years suddenly vanishes from inside a room by striking a match, so the accumulated impurities of thousands of births at once vanish from the mind by a particle of divine grace.
So this is the kind of thing we want to keep in mind, because all of us have gone through all sorts of varieties of experiences in our lives and done things that we've thought of as mistakes or thought of as sort of dark or dead ends in a maze, you could say. But it doesn't matter. We're reminded here that all of these impurities at once vanish with the spark of divine grace. And so this gives us all great hope that all we need to do is to keep doing our spiritual practices, and that spark of divine grace will come at the time when the Lord's grace descends. All right?
Why does a devotee whose mind is filled with God give up name, fame, home, wife, and children? As an insect, forgetting its enjoyments, cares little for its life and springs into the flame, or as a fly, carrying a fig, falls into the honeypot with great glee. Even so a devotee who has made God his sole refuge goes unto him, forgetting all other minor enjoyments.
And of course, we've all experienced that. Perhaps when you were growing up, you had a closet full of toys, and every couple of years you would clean out the closet and you'd find all these things, and you'd even forgotten that you even had them, but when you were younger, they were things that you enjoyed playing with, and now they seem like kind of silly. Your interests have completely changed. Similarly, you might have a new hobby, and the new hobby completely absorbs your mind, and your old interests have just kind of faded. You've kind of forgotten about them completely. And so, similarly, if we get the ultimate goal of life, God, then all these other things don't seem very interesting anymore, except for possibly if you've reached that vijnana state where you realize God is in everything and it's part of the play, and you might feel that you're part of that drama and part of that play, doing any particular thing. But it's the realization of God that is so sweet that it helps you to forget all of the lesser joys of life. All right?
This water is called by some jala, by others aqua, and others pani. So one God is called differently by different men as Allah, Jehovah, Ishvara, and so forth.
Another long passage. I'll just relate another telescope incident that reminds me of that thing. We were up at I think it was a Girl Scout camp. They invited us to bring our telescopes up so they could have a night of sky viewing, but it was one of those partly cloudy days, and so we would just find a clearing in the sky, and we'd get the telescope focused on an interesting object, and we'd get maybe 2 or 3 of the students up there looking through the telescope, and then the clouds would come, and then we'd have to search for another clear part of the sky, and we'd get another maybe 1 or 2 people able to look at something, and then that would get covered up again. So that's what reminded me of that metaphor of the clouds covering the clarity of the sky, just like things in the world tend to cover our view of God, and then we have to look for that clearing in the sky. All right, we'll go on with the next one.
Even now, I've seen a beautiful chameleon of a bright red color, which has just now hid itself amongst thick leaves of the forebranch of that tree. Have you too seen this strange creature, brother? Said one of the 2 travelers to the other. Oh, yes, I've already seen it. It's not red, though, but yellow. The first traveler, hearing this, replied, Your eye's affected with jaundice, brother. Why, then, do you think yellow what is red, even like the red lotus? The other replied, Friend, I'm neither jaundiced, nor my eyes are misleading. Had I seen red what is yellow, then of course my eyes would have been at fault. The Lord in the beginning created the chameleons yellow, but this red chameleon must now be your own new creation. And when they were thus quarreling between themselves, the third joined them in their way, on which both of them eagerly asked at once, Brother, tell us truly, is this chameleon red or yellow? And hearing them, he answered, Both of you are right, as it has various forms. Now sometimes it becomes green, thus assumes the leaf color, becomes almost imperceptible amongst the leaves, and there the keen-eyed creature waits for the insects destined to be its prey. It also assumes diverse forms to suit itself to procure its food. The learned, therefore, always call it Bahurupa, as observing its nature. Even so, the unthinking men, knowing very little of the few different aspects of the infinite and universal Lord, eternally quarrel among themselves, You too, therefore, should give up bigotry after this. Broaden your views without reviling others' religion. For all such petty quarrels proceed from vanity and ignorance.
And partial truths. And we played the musical version from Ramakrishna Oratorio a few months ago when we read similar passages. This was both an elaborated and a truncated version. He only has two people arguing here, but in other versions we have several people seeing it at different colors and being enlightened by the one that lives near the tree where the chameleon lives and has seen its many colors. And of course, this is an analogy for Sri Ramakrishna having seen God in many ways. He saw God through all sorts of forms and realized God through all sorts of traditions. And so he was analogous to the one who lived by the tree and knew the chameleon in its many forms. Sri Ramakrishna knew God in its many forms. He knew God as Kali, he knew God as Krishna, he knew God as Christ, he knew God as Allah. He experienced God as Rama. So he experienced God in all of these forms and knew they were all really just aspects of the one, just as the chameleon in different colors was just the same chameleon masquerading and hiding. Very much like Maya, you see. Maya hides the true nature of God, just as the chameleon hides its nature in its many colors. All right.
I'm skipping to number 2.
Okay.
As all gas pipes proceeding from one common central store light the different streets and houses of a town with varied intensities, so the avatars proceeding from the one Almighty God and taking their births in different countries of the world, among different nations, shed light of the intelligence throughout the world.
Yeah, that's a nice metaphor. And sometimes they'll do the same thing with the water pipes, and they'll have fountains, and one fountain has the water coming out of a sculpture of a fish, and another one has the water coming out of the mouth of a dragon, or mouth of a lion, or mouth of coming out of the water pot from a lady holding a water pot. And so it's all the same water, just coming out of different forms. So similarly, you can do the same thing with the gas pipes and the gas coming out of the pipe, coming and lighting the different types of lamps and furnaces and stoves in the village. All right.
When iron is once converted into gold, the touching of the philosopher's stone, afterwards you may place it anywhere you like. It will always remain gold. Similarly, when a fortunate man becomes pure, after coming in contact with the Sadguru, he may then live anywhere he likes and remain pure forever without being soiled at all.
Yeah, it's interesting, all these elements, like gold, come from iron in a supernova. The iron core of a collapsed star collapses even further into a supernova, and it gets converted into all sorts of heavier elements, including gold. So the touch of the philosopher's stone is like supernova, converting it into those other heavier elements. All right, let's continue.
Though an iron sword, being converted into gold by the touch of the philosopher's stone, does not change its form, yet it loses the power of inflicting any mortal wound like before. Similarly, when a great righteous man becomes internally pure with the touch of the feet of the Almighty, although he does not change his former shape, still he is never again led by any evil thought.
Well, I'm not sure I'd want to be struck by a gold sword any more than an iron one. I think it would probably still be tough enough to pierce flesh, but anyway, we get the idea of the analogy that normally you don't make knives out of gold, because gold is not a very hard metal. It certainly wouldn't, if you used it to cut things in the kitchen, it would get pretty dull pretty fast. So the analogy is a little weak, but we get the point. All right.
As a lodestone rock hidden under the ocean drowns down vessels by drawing them in all its iron nailings, so when the misery of the Lord draws us under and undoes all the worldly ties of a man, it then drowns him at once in the ocean of divine love, full of eternal bliss.
Again, it's a little hard to imagine a lodestone being that strong that it could pull all the nails out of a boat, but it's kind of a nice image, isn't it? That the pull of the divine love from the Lord can pull out all of our worldly tendencies, and we can become detached from all of those worldly desires and be filled with divine bliss, just as an ocean sinking into the ocean. We'll do one more, and then we'll make some announcements.
When brinjal's potatoes become boiled or siddha, they then become soft. Similarly, when man becomes siddha or perfect, they then become soft in their nature. But like the unboiled or half-boiled vegetable, the imperfect men of the world are hard in their nature and merely increase the number of hypocrites and the wicked. This is a pun upon the word siddha, which means both boiled and perfect.
Yeah, we talk about some people being hard-boiled, where they're not very flexible, they're not very kind-hearted, and so yeah, we get the same kind of metaphor here. And of course, we also have that idea of vegetables getting softer and softer and easier to absorb if you've cooked them. That's why we cook things, is it makes them more digestible. And so similarly, people that are hard-boiled by nature, you could say, do not contribute to the beauty of the world as much as the soft-boiled, or the ones that have been boiled to perfection, you could say, and become softer rather than harder. All right, so next week, I've been called to do a retreat in Phoenix on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, so I won't be here, and we haven't quite figured out what we're going to do for this class next week. So you'll have to watch for the announcements in the newsletter. There'll either be a substitute, or we'll play a pre-recorded tape, or something of that nature. So there almost certainly won't be an in-person meeting. It'll be online. The other option is that the America's First Guru, who you might, if you've been at the temple, you've seen the flyer, or if they've seen it on the newsletter, the story of Swami Vivekananda that's been done as a documentary, about an hour-and-a-half documentary. It will be shown on PBS on Friday, not at this time, but it will be at either 5:30 p.m. or 10:30 p.m. And so you could do that as a substitute for the class if you like. It's on the PBS World channel. It's also on PBS SoCal, 5:30 and 10:30, and it's also on the air on channel 50.4, and on Spectrum it's channel either 1269 or 198, depending on your area in which you're getting your Spectrum. So if you have friends that are perhaps curious about what you do for a religion, and you might ask them to tune into this, but it's almost more of a devotee piece. It's probably devotees that are going to be interested, but it's also something that might serve as an introduction to other people, so that they understand who Swami Vivekananda was. Then this Sunday, we have a guest Swami who's speaking. He, you could say, did his formative years here at Trabuco, at the Trabuco Monastery. His name is Swami Atmavidyananda, and then after being in Trabuco for 16 years, he was sent to head the newly formed Vedanta Center of Greater Washington, D.C., and he's been there ever since its founding. But he'll be giving a lecture on Buddha and Swamiji, meaning Swami Vivekananda. All right, we'll close with a chant. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman floweth all that is. From Brahman all, yet is it still the same. Om, peace, peace, peace. And although I won't see you next week, hopefully we'll all see you in 2 weeks. Thank you very much.